I think I'd like to create like Billy Wilder. I'd show you the apartment and tell you something like it hot. Or maybe, like Mr. Hitchcock, I'd make you scared of heights, ropes, birds, and binoculars. But until then, all I have is this dime store cinema.
Hello, YouTube, internet, world. Welcome back to another episode of Dime Store Cinema on the road. Let's talk movies. Today, I'd like to discuss the Jim Jarmusch, I've talked to you about this before, can't say the guy's name. It's very frustrating, because after seeing this movie, Paterson, his most recent film, I love him even more. He is probably one of my favorite working directors. In this movie, although not for everyone, was so wonderful to watch. It's something about his filmmaking that speaks to me so much more vividly than almost any other, as I say, currently working director. Like, you know, I love Tarantino, and I mean, his movies are some of the most entertaining films you'll ever watch. And Spielberg, of course, you know, a titan among filmmakers as far as the industry standard. You have Refn, who is, you know, an auteur, and although pretentious, very good at making visual cinema. And Scorsese, who makes, you know, some of the most amazing films you can ever hope to see. In light of that and all the other fantastic directors that I'm not listing, there's something about Jim Jarmusch and the way he tells stories, and even the way that he presents information, because a lot of his movies aren't telling a story in a way that I think is coherent to many people. And you know, starting out, I need to apologize for how labored my speech is right now. I have been on a work schedule the past 2 weeks where I've been getting maybe 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night, and it's Friday, so it's all compounding on today. I am the most tired I've been. I'm the most sore I've been. I'm the most lethargic that I will be in the course of this week. It's the Thursday and Friday of the past 2 weeks have just been very difficult. And normally I choose not to record on those days because of that. However, I just finished watching Paterson, and I loved it so much that I felt compelled to make a video. And to be honest, I will probably end up watching it again when I'm more awake and alert, and I would like to maybe do another review after seeing it again and kind of really coming to a consensus with my thoughts. Because this movie can be seen as either a very deep philosophical look at poetry and art itself, or it can be looked at just a very mundane character study of a blue-collar worker. And what I love so much about it is that I don't think that in the way that this is told, that those things have to be mutually exclusive. I think that this movie is very much a both and, not an either or. And it's why I like it so much, because it's very much a representation of life, in as much as things are very rarely an either or. They're almost always in some way, both and. A saying that I came up with that I thoroughly enjoy, and I know that sounds extremely pretentious, and I apologize, but it expresses my view on this very much, and that is to say that things are not black and white, they are gray and fuchsia. And I mean, because it's to say that, you know, the black and white is often mixed, and then the rest of the world is just bright and vibrant. You know, there's not a duality, there is a multitude. But I mean, that's, like I said, I know that sounds extremely pretentious and self-aggrandizing, and I don't mean it to be, and it's not my intent. It's just a thought that I've had. And so in this movie, you can look at it in a very metaphorical way. You can view this movie as Adam Driver's character being a representation of an artist or art itself, and his wife as being the aloof, constantly changing muse, the hard to pin down and often elusive and even annoyingly vague muse that is life. And then the dog can be seen as the mundane responsibility of life, and his job can be seen as one's place by which he experiences that which grants him the insight to write or to express. And then, of course, the bar is full of reference, and it's essentially the window into influence, because they frequently talk about artists and musicians who have visited and who have been through, and they make allusions to classic not only literature but plays such as Romeo and Juliet. And then, you know, there's the representation of unrequited love, and then there's the moment for Paterson to express an act of heroism, which is often something very much aggrandized in poetry and in epic poems, and then in art itself. So you can look at it in that sense, where it's a very metaphorical movie, where it's representing something, or you can look at it as the artist struggle, or maybe not even the artist struggle. That's probably not a good way of wording it. Perhaps a better way of saying it would be to say that it's a representation of the artistry of everyone, because it's really hard to deny that Paterson, and to explain, Adam Driver plays a character named Paterson, who grows up in a place called Paterson. And Paterson is a real place, and there is is dealing with a poem that's called Paterson, and that is about the place Paterson. So there's a little bit of meta, self-referential communication within the movie. So in any case, like I was saying, the artistry of everyone. So through the course of the movie, this blue-collar worker, and not just in what he does, but he literally wears a blue collar almost the entire movie, except for maybe one or two scenes where he's wearing a white t-shirt, and another scene where he's maybe wearing a different collared shirt. So it's not just me saying that. It's a very literal representation of that. And then also he's a bus driver, so blue collar job, and so it follows him through the course of a week. And so he likes to write poetry, so that is the expression of his art. And as I say, he, through the course of this week, meets and talks with and experiences other people in what they say, and what he comes across is people who are storytellers, people who are listeners, people who are poets, people who are going through tragedy, people who are experiencing an almost fictional level of, as I said, unrequited love. And so it's this constant ebb and flow of experience that influences his writing. And then the big breaking point of the film is when he loses his poetry and he has to start all over again, and not through any words that he says and not through anything explicit. It's implied that he must come to terms with the fact that his words have passed, and through a chance encounter with a different insight, he is he's influenced to begin writing again. And it reminds me of a saying. This part of the movie reminded me of a saying, and I do not remember who coined it or who is known to have said it, but the idea is, to paraphrase, you take, when you're writing, you take your favorite line and you throw it away. Because if you have a favorite line in your work, you're writing it for yourself and not for your audience. So it won't resonate with your audience, it will only resonate with you. So in losing all of his previous poetry, in feeling that great sense of loss, in experiencing that sense of hopelessness where all of his ideas, for however long his notebook has existed, is gone now, and he has to start over again. He now has that part of insight, that experience that he had never experienced before, on which to write. So, like I said, there are a lot of different ways you can look at this movie. And also, as I said, I don't think that you're meant to look at it one way or the other. I think it's meant to be all of those things. I think it's meant to speak to art and what art is and what an artist is. They make a big point at the end, towards the end of the movie, to point out the professions of all of these, a number of artists, of poets, of different forms of artists, to suggest that the occupation that you have is not necessarily your identity. Your occupation does not dictate whether or not you are an artist, or whether or not you can or cannot create art. And it also speaks to the idea of both the fluidity and immutability of art. He meets a Japanese man who's visiting Paterson because of the artists who have come from Paterson. So it's an interesting scene. It's an interesting scene the way it is, because it almost seems like this person just blips into existence to communicate with Paterson and then leave. And there's a little bit of subtext going on, but not much. He's meant to be just a force that that inspires. And he makes a really interesting observation and quote about translating poetry, and I don't remember it specifically right now, but it was very interesting, saying how you can't translate poetry. And I think you can extrapolate from that. You can't really translate art, which is why he went to visit the place where these artists were from, who created the art, because he's trying to experience it in its native meaning. And I think that can be in a way profound, because of the impact that culture and language itself has on meaning. So to try to translate a Japanese haiku and to understand it fully as the artist intended, or even as the culture understands it through a shared translation of language, or communication of language, is nonsense. You're never gonna have that level of understanding until you have actually experienced that culture, until you learn that language. And this Japanese gentleman is speaking in broken English, so his understanding might not be full, but at the same time he has learned the language, and he is at that point visiting a spot that for all intents and purposes could have been a place of deep inspiration for these artists, a place where they more than likely would have visited and would have seen, and therefore is part of their writing and part of their art. So it's this idea of experiencing art, but then also being the artist, and also being art itself. It's just... And I love it because of its subtlety. It's a very subtle movie. It doesn't go out of its way to present these things to you. Like I said, you could take it for what it is, as just a week following this guy who has a schedule that he pretty much keeps throughout the whole week, except for when he doesn't. And that's life. That's what most of us have to do. We get up, we have responsibilities, we go to work, we come home, we go spend time with friends and with our families, and then we go to bed and we wake up the next day and we do the same thing. And that's what this movie could be. And even at that level, that very basic level of just following just a good man in his everyday life, it's interesting to watch. And I mean, obviously it's not gonna have the same type of entertainment value as a blockbuster or an action film, or, you know, even the same type of resonance as a romance. But you can see even in his relationship with his wife, which is somewhat odd, because she is so much different than him, you can see that there's not... It's a weathered commitment, it seems. A weathered love. Like, I even in the moments where you can tell that he finds her to be somewhat silly, maybe even childish, there doesn't seem to be a resentment. There only seems to be a resentment toward her dog. Which goes back to where I was saying that you could take it as the dog as a metaphor, as the mundane responsibility of life. Because in the mundane responsibility of life, although potentially a teacher of certain things, it's oftentimes the anti-muse, if you will, of the artist. You know, the artist who wants to create an experience is forced to do these things that takes away from his time, that limits his time to experience and create. And you see throughout the movie, oftentimes his responsibility is leading him by a tether, as opposed to the other way around, which is what you would expect in the relationship between owner and dog. But even so, this dog leads him to meet and experience new people, which the artist would value. So once again, it's like it's presenting these ideas and then subverting them in a way. And I love it because the most extreme thing that happens in the movie is him losing his notebook. And I won't go into how it happens because that's part of the experiencing of the, the experience of the movie. But suffice to say, that happens, and that's the catalyst of the movie. That's the moment, and that's all it is. That's a very mundane occurrence, something that I would say that almost anyone who writes has experienced before. A misplacement of the notebook, or a ruining of the notebook, accidentally spilling something on a paragraph you loved. It happens, and it's part of mundane life, and yet still is something deeply profound to the individual who experiences it. And I could go on. I could. And once again, what I love about this movie is the fact that it could be and is deep and philosophical, but it is not pretentious in the way that it expresses it. It's very down to earth. It's very accessible. It's very relatable. But when looking at it, it's also very profound. And maybe I only find it to be profound because I consider myself an artist of sorts. So maybe I am projecting onto the movie. But, I mean, in all honesty, because I know of Jim's filmmaking, the way he makes films, the way he tells stories, I'm perhaps swayed by that, which maybe I should be, maybe I shouldn't be. But I don't think that one can deny the multifaceted way in which this story can be understood. And I think everyone, or maybe not everyone, but many people will experience it differently. and have their own take on it. And I know that Chris Stuckman, a reviewer that I respect, reviewed this movie, and he had, I think, some similar things to say, but I'm sure he experienced it differently than I did. And you know, I try, as I've said before, to avoid reviewing movies that he and others have reviewed, because, you know, they are professionals, and I think that their opinion will carry more weight. However, as I said, I just finished watching this movie, and I felt compelled to talk about it. And you know, I make these YouTube videos because I don't have anyone to talk with about these things. So you, this camera, the eyes who happen to view it, the ears who happen to hear it, are essentially just a tool by which I can express my thoughts, in lieu of the time necessary to write the thoughts. I am forced to speak them, and rather than just speaking them into the air, into the ether, and allowing them to just dissipate, I choose to speak them into a camera and record them and allow people to hear them and respond to them if they wish. But yeah, I loved this movie, guys, and if you are a fan of any of Jim Jarmusch's other movies, Down by Law, or Coffee and Cigarettes, or The Limits of Control, if you're a fan of any of those, or if you're interested in any of those, I think you'll, at the very least, respect this movie for what it is, what it's trying to do, how it does it, because it's very competently made and visually interesting without being pretentious. Like I said, there doesn't seem to be any pretense to this movie. It's a very laid back, chill, down to earth movie. It's kind of like the way to describe it. It would be kind of like the American blue collar version of Remains of the Day. Instead of having large sweeping cinematography that's indicative of some of the beautiful scenery of the English countryside where the movie took place, and instead of having, you know, huge stars like Anthony Hopkins, it's instead very contained in this very small town full of blue-collar workers and dive bars. And instead of sweeping shots of a countryside, it's instead close shots, and yet beautiful shots of this small town, and particularly of Paterson, both the person and the town. So it's kind of the you know, the Americanized, as I said, blue-collar version of that type of movie. It's a very slow and methodical movie, a character piece. In any case, now that I've bored you all to tears and made you want to never watch any of my videos again because of how pretentious I sound, I'm gonna go and go to work. So thank you all for watching. If you have lasted this long, I appreciate it. Please like, please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing, or my kind of thing, and I will talk to you all later.